I've been a caver for over a decade, but what happened in Hollow Ridge Cave has left me broken. It was supposed to be a routine exploration, a newly discovered passage that my buddy Mike and I were eager to map. If only we'd known what lurked in those depths. The descent started normally enough. We rappelled down the narrow entrance shaft, our headlamps cutting through the oppressive darkness. The limestone walls glistened with moisture, and the air grew colder as we went deeper. The usual sounds of water dripping and our own breathing echoed out off the walls. But there was something else, a faint rhythmic pulsing that seemed to come from the very rock itself. 2 hours in, we reached a fork. Our map showed only one passage, but here were two identical tunnels stretching into the blackness. Mike suggested we split up to cover more ground. I agreed, though something about the idea made my skin crawl. I took the left tunnel, marking my path with fluorescent tape. The passage twisted and turned, getting narrower as I went. I had to crawl in some spots, the rough stone scraping my back. The pulsing grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just a sound anymore, I could feel it in my chest, in my bones. After what felt like hours, I emerged into a vast chamber. My headlamp couldn't reach the ceiling or far walls. As I moved further in, my light fell on something that made my blood run cold. Cave paintings. But these weren't ancient. The pigments looked fresh, glistening in my lamplight, and the images, they were like nothing I'd ever seen. Distorted, elongated figures, animals that didn't exist. And everywhere a recurring symbol, a spiral with too many arms, pulsing with a faint, sickly light. That's when I noticed the silence. The constant drip of water that had accompanied me was gone. The air felt thick, oppressive, and there was a smell, musty and organic, like rotting vegetation and something else. Something metallic and sickly sweet. I turned to leave and froze. The passage I'd come through was gone. Smooth rock face stood where the opening had been. I ran my hands over it frantically, searching for a seam, a crack, anything. Panic rising, I spun around, searching for another way out. My lamp flickered, the beam weakening. In the fading light, I saw movement at the edge of the chamber, shapes detaching themselves from the walls, unfolding like nightmarish origami. They moved towards me with a jerky, inhuman gait. I caught glimpses of too long limbs, of faces with too many eyes, of mouths filled with needle-like teeth. My lamp died, plunging me into total darkness filled with the sound of shuffling feet and rasping breath. I felt cold, clammy hands grabbing at me, pulling me in different directions. The pulsing was deafening now, drowning out my screams. I don't remember much after that. Flashes of grotesque faces, the feeling of being dragged across rough stone, the sensation of falling, and always that maddening pulse. I woke up 3 days later at the cave entrance, alone and half dead from dehydration. My gear was gone. So was Mike. The search and rescue team found no trace of him, no vast chamber, no cave paintings, no fork in the tunnel. According to them, I'd gotten lost in a dead-end passage barely 100 feet from the main cavern. But I know what I saw, what I experienced. The nightmares haven't stopped. I see those spirals every time I close my eyes. I wake up screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat, my body covered in strange, spiral-shaped bruises that the doctors can't explain. The worst part, last week I got a text from Mike's number. Just 3 words. Still down here. When I called the police, they told me the number had been disconnected months ago, right after Mike's disappearance. I'm writing this as a warning. Stay away from Hollow Ridge Cave. Something ancient and malevolent dwells in those depths. Something that doesn't sleep, doesn't die, and is always hungry. And somewhere in the darkness below it's waiting, watching, ready for the next explorer to make a wrong turn. I've been to many places in this world, places where the line between life and death blurs, where the air feels heavy with something more than just moisture or decay. But nothing compares to the hollow place. The name itself is a whisper, spoken only by those who know of its existence. It isn't marked on any map, you won't find it in any guidebook. It's a wound in the earth, festering with something ancient and malevolent. I found it by accident. I was in a small town in the mountains, a forgotten place where the trees grow tall and thick, where the mist clings to the ground like a shroud. The locals were friendly enough, but there was a tension in the air, a subtle fear that I couldn't quite place. They warned me not to go wandering alone in the woods, especially not after dark. I laughed it off, assuming it was just old superstitions. But then I found the journal. It was in the attic of the old house I was renting, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. The leather-bound book was cracked and brittle with age, the pages yellowed and stained. Most of it was mundane notes about daily life, observations of the weather, records of strange illnesses that seemed to plague the town. But toward the end, the entries grew erratic, the handwriting shaky and desperate. They spoke of a place deep in the woods, a place where the earth seemed to breathe, where the trees grew in twisted, unnatural patterns. The author wrote of dreams, nightmares, really that had started to plague him after he ventured too close. Dreams of voices calling to him from the darkness, of shadows that moved on their own, of a yawning chasm that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. He called it the hollow place. My curiosity was piqued. The rational part of my mind dismissed it as the ravings of a man driven mad by isolation and illness. But another part, the part that had always been drawn to the unknown, couldn't resist. I had to see it for myself. I left early the next morning, telling no one where I was going. The woods were thick and silent, the kind of silence that presses in on you, making your own breath sound too loud. The path I followed was overgrown, barely more than a deer trail, winding deeper and deeper into the forest. The further I went, the stranger things became. The trees began to twist and bend in unnatural ways, their trunks gnarled and blackened as if scorched by some ancient fire. The air grew colder and the shadows deepened, even though the sun was still high in the sky. I felt a growing unease, a sense of being watched, though I could see no one. The birds had fallen silent, and even the wind seemed reluctant to stir the leaves. And then I found it. The ground suddenly sloped downward, the trees thinning out around a massive sinkhole, its edges crumbling and raw. It was as if the earth had simply given up, collapsing inward to reveal a dark, gaping maw. the hollow place. I stood at the edge, peering down into the abyss. The light didn't seem to penetrate the darkness. It was as if the void itself was consuming it. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't look away. Something was down there, something old and hungry, and it was calling to me. The journal had mentioned voices, but nothing could have prepared me for what I heard. It wasn't a single voice, but a cacophony, a chorus of whispers and screams, all speaking at once, in a language that was more felt than heard. The words twisted in my mind, forming images of despair, pain, and madness. I saw faces in the darkness, pale and hollow-eyed, their mouths stretched wide in silent screams. My legs trembled, and I nearly fell forward into the pit. Somehow I managed to pull back, gasping for breath, my mind reeling. But the voices didn't stop. They were inside me now, crawling beneath my skin, scratching at the back of my skull. I ran. I don't remember much of the journey back. The woods seemed to close in around me, the trees reaching out with twisted limbs, trying to pull me back. The path had changed, the forest itself shifting and warping, trying to trap me. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. The voices followed me, growing louder, more insistent, promising things that no living person should ever hear. When I finally stumbled out of the woods, the sun was setting, casting long, twisted shadows across the ground. I collapsed on the doorstep of the old house, my body shaking, my mind shattered. I don't know how long I lay there, but when I finally found the strength to move, I knew one thing: I could never go back to that place. But the hollow place doesn't let go. The dream started that night. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the sound of those voices echoing in my mind, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I tried to leave the town, but every road seemed to lead back to the house, back to the woods. It was as if the entire world had twisted around me, trapping me in a loop of my own fear. And the voices, they're with me all the time now, whispering in the back of my mind, filling my thoughts with dark, twisted images. Sometimes I see the faces from the pit, staring back at me from mirrors, from windows, from the shadows in the corners of my vision. They're getting closer, and I can feel their hunger, their need to drag me back to the hollow place. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. The line between waking and dreaming has blurred, and I'm not sure what's real anymore. But I know one thing: the hollow place is still out there, waiting, calling to me. And one day soon I'll go back, because I have no choice. It won't let me go.